The single best thing about FPV is also the single worst thing about FPV. The best thing about FPV is when you get together with a bunch of other pilots and you're all flying, having a great time, whether you're racing, freestyle, tiny whoop, whatever it is. You get a bunch of FPV pilots in the same place and it is freaking magical. But the worst thing about FPV is when you're flying and you're having the best pack of your life and then some stupid son of a powers up on you and your video goes out and knocks you out of the air and you're like, who just plugged in? Maybe you even lose a quad. And some people feel that this problem is even worse with DJI and Walksnail. They say that DJI and Walksnail are ruining FPV and you cannot integrate them into a flight line. No matter what video system we fly, it is all of our responsibility to know how to avoid interfering with other people and how to behave on a flight line so everybody can have a good time. And that's what today's video is about. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Since interference is the thing that we are trying to avoid, then let's start with the question, what is interference? And interference happens when somebody else's radio transmission overpowers your radio transmission to the point that your signal is disrupted. Interference is not unique to FPV video links. Interference can occur between all types of RF devices, but some types are more or less prone to causing and receiving interference. Specifically, digital radio transmitters like Wi-Fi, like DJI, like Walksnail, they are more able to resist the effects of interference, like Express LRS. The reasons that they tend to get better performance, and sometimes the users of those systems kind of think that interference doesn't even happen, is that the digital technology can resist and hide the effects of interference better. Analog systems, interference is more obvious since it directly affects the signal that you're seeing in a really obvious way, as we see in this picture here on the slide. And analog systems may just have less sophisticated technology that is less able to deal with interference from other devices. So let's get some examples of what interference looks like in the real world. We're going to start with an analog device, and we're also going to show the digital devices as well. This is an analog transmitter interfering with another analog transmitter. And you can see that basically what happens is the receiver ends up locking on to whichever of the analog signals is stronger. And sometimes you get a little bit of horizontal scrolling like you're seeing here, where you kind of half see one image, and then sometimes it locks in and it switches to the other image. If the two cameras are not the same standard, like NTSC versus PAL, you can also get a rolling image where the receiver is using the wrong standard. So that's analog versus analog. Next, we're going to look at a digital device interfering with an analog device. This is a Walksnail video transmitter. A DJI video transmitter would look much the same. We're going to end up with these black horizontal bands that move across the image. Sometimes they are made up of little speckles, as you can see, and that is the digital transmission, which occurs in very short, frequent bursts versus an analog transmission, which is just sort of continuous. The closer we get, the more pronounced those horizontal bands become, until eventually they completely disrupt the signal and the receiver can't lock on anymore. That is Walksnail and DJI interfering with analog. Now here's what HD0 looks like when it interferes with an analog transmitter. In just a second, the HD0 video transmitter is going to power up and you will see what basically looks like static. It is still made up of the, there it is, it started. It's still made up of the little speckles that tell you it's a digital transmitter, but it is a more consistent staticky instead of like horizontal bands. And the closer the video transmitter is, the more powerful the interference, until you get sort of a worst case scenario, although I am basically touching the antennas to get it to be as sort of staticky as you see there. Next, let's look at what happens when analog interferes with Walksnail. And we're only going to look at analog interference here because the effect of interference with the digital systems is always the same. The magnitude may change depending on the strength of the signal and how it's interfering, but whether it's analog, HD0, or DJI interfering with Walksnail, the actual way it manifests in your goggles is going to be identical. And the first way it might manifest is like this. it may simply go to black screen. You can see channel 7 has gone completely black there, and the bitrate has gone to 0. It's just completely disconnected. In very extreme cases, you simply lose signal entirely. But in less extreme cases, what you're going to see is that the bitrate is going to go all over the place. We're at 25 megabits per second here, but you can see it's dropping 25, 17, 10, and you can see the latency is all over the place. It's jumping into the hundreds, it's going back down to 60, it's completely unstable. This is how a digital system like Walksnail and DJI indicates that you are experiencing interference. HD0 manifests interference in a way that's something between digital and analog. Sometimes, like a digital device, you'll just get a complete loss of signal here. This rainbow screen is just a complete loss of signal due to interference. But in less extreme cases, you'll get this repeating pattern of interference, which you might think was caused by a digital transmitter, but in this case, it is an analog transmitter, and that's just the sort of hybrid analog/digital nature of HD0. And here's what it looks like when a digital video transmitter like Walksnail or DJI interferes with HD0. The pattern of this interference was very interesting to me. It never really seemed to completely blow away the screen. It seemed like you were sort of losing the bottom half of the screen more and more depending on how extreme the interference was. Watch how it changes as I move the goggles closer and closer to the HD0 receiver. Very interesting, and I haven't seen this exact form of interference before in any video system. There are 3 basic conditions that cause interference. The first is the frequency of the interfering device. When the interfering device is transmitting on close to the same frequency as you are, then interference is more likely to happen. The second is physical proximity. When the interfering device is closer to the receiving device, then that means that the signal is going to be stronger, since the closer you are to the transmitter, the stronger the signal is, and the stronger signal results in more interference. And this effect is worse if your video transmitter is far away, because what matters is that the interference is stronger than your signal. In other words, if your quadcopter is really close to you, and its signal is super strong, you may be relatively immune to interference. But if your quadcopter is far, far away and its signal is really weak, it may be relatively easy to interfere. We see this happen when somebody plugs in, their video looks good, they take off, they fly away, and then suddenly somebody's hitting them. Proximity. And the last condition that causes interference is output power. If the interfering device is transmitting at a significantly higher output power than you are, then it's going to be easier for it to interfere. In order to understand frequency better, we're going to refer to this FPV frequency chart, thanks to the folks over at PropWashed, Rotor Hazard, RC Shim, Randy Cohen, etc. All these folks down at the bottom, thanks to them for coming up with this. And this breaks out the way that FPV video transmitters break up the 5.8 gigahertz frequency band into channels. So the first thing to understand here is that the channels that we use are completely arbitrary. The 5.8 gigahertz frequency band is unlicensed. It's not unregulated, but it's unlicensed. And pretty much anybody who follows a few basic rules can transmit pretty much wherever they want in that band. So way back when analog video transmitters were first being a thing, some people said, I know, we're going to break it up into channels like this. And other people said, I know, we're going to break it up in channels like this. As long as they all fit within this frequency band of 5650 through 5925, they break it up however they want. But don't get overwhelmed, because raceband, which we see right here, is what is the vast majority of people are using today. These other bands, A, B, E, F, they are mostly historical, although they are still supported in modern video transmitters. And the reason raceband is so useful is that it separates the channels as widely as possible, while still getting as many channels as possible within this frequency band. Look at the F band. They squeezed all the channels in this narrow band, and as a result, they kind of overlap a little bit. Raceband doesn't do that. So we're going to focus on raceband, and by the way, the SharkBite or HD0 video transmitters use almost identical frequency allocation, so you can just treat SharkBite as if it uses raceband. Raceband 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the frequencies are the same. When it comes to DJI, however, the frequencies are not the same. DJI channels go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the exact same as the raceband channels. The exact frequencies are not exactly the same, but they're pretty close. And then they go 8, 6, 7. I There's a reason why they did this. It's a weird technical regulatory reason, and it boils down to DJI is weird that way. Hey there, folks. Joshua from the future here. I've just realized that the SharkBite or HD0 channels here are labeled as 8, 6, 7, the same as DJI. I can't tell if I've grabbed an old version of this chart or if it just hasn't been updated. That hasn't been true for a long time. SharkBite, HD0, the channels exactly overlap with Raceband. So when you're thinking about avoiding interference and you're thinking about frequencies, you're going to want to use different frequencies or channels than the other people who are flying. If somebody is on Raceband 1, you're not going to want to be on Raceband 1. You might want to be on Raceband 3 or Raceband 5 or DJI 6, because that totally is the way numbers work. In order to demonstrate how this all plays out in the real world, I've set up kind of a little fake flight line in my yard. And I've got analog, DJI, Walksnail, and HD0 quads, and we're gonna sort of smush them all up against each other and see what it looks like in the goggles when that happens. We're gonna start with the Diatone Roma F5 V2 here, and it is gonna be transmitting at 25 milliwatts on Raceband 8. And we're gonna take this quadcopter and we're gonna put it on Raceband 1, and it's also going to be broadcasting at 25 milliwatts. We're going to put it over there about 10 or 15 feet away, and we're going to see what effect it has on the signal. Yeah, as expected, no interference whatsoever. I mean, this guy's on Raceband 1, this guy's on Raceband 8. They are so far apart in the frequency that it kind of doesn't matter. It's going to be pretty hard to get them to interfere. There are basically two ways that I can get this quadcopter to interfere with me, and they're both going to relate to making its signal stronger relative to my signal. One of them is going to be to move it closer to me in terms of what channel it's on. The other is going to be to move it closer to me in terms of its physical proximity to me. And I guess there's a third way, which would be to make my signal weaker by moving my drone further away. Let's play with that. So I'm gonna move that guy over from channel 1, and I'm gonna move it much closer to Race 8. Let's move it to Raceband 6, and it is at maximum output power. That's an Immersion RC Ghost hybrid, so I think its max power is something like 600 milliwatts. Here we go. Nope. Still no interference whatsoever. In fact, I'm gonna bet I could go to Race 7. Still no interference. Oh, I see just the tiniest shimmer in my signal. Let's put them on the same channel, Raceband 8. And yeah, now I'm getting blasted. In the next part of the video, I'm going to address the claim that it's not possible to have DJI and analog on the same flight line without interference, that DJI swamps the band and ruins it for everybody. I'm going to demonstrate that this is actually simply a matter of knowledge and practice, and not a fundamental technological limitation. But before I do that, I want to take a second and plug my Patreon. Patreon is a website where you can subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month, or more if you feel like I've earned it. The amount that you subscribe at is completely up to you. You can stop whenever you want. Patrons get access to my Discord server, a chat server where you can hang out with other people in the FPV community, and they get access to podcast downloads of all of my live streams if you prefer to listen to them on a podcast in the car or something instead of watch them on YouTube. Patreon is the single best way to support the kind of content that you are hopefully enjoying right now. If today's the day that I earned your support, there's a link in the video description to my Patreon website. I'd love to have you as a supporter, and if I haven't earned it yet, I'm going to keep making content. I hope you keep watching the content, and maybe that day will come. There's another oddity in the way that DJI handles its channels, and it has to do with DJI Channel 8, which is the same as Raceband Channel 6, because of course it is. When a DJI video transmitter first powers up, it goes to Channel 8, which DJI treats as the public channel. The video transmitter waits there until the goggles meet it there, and then the goggles tell the video transmitter what channel it needs to go to. And so you may think, if you're a DJI pilot, that if you've got your goggles set to channel 1, that you're safe to power up if somebody is flying on Raceband 6. That's not quite true. For just a fraction of a second, when your video transmitter powers up, it will be transmitting on channel 8, and a pilot on Raceband 6 will get some interference, and then your goggles will move. It's best practice when you're flying with mixed analog and DJI pilots to have the analog pilots not use Raceband 6 at all. Interestingly, DJI pilots also can't use Raceband 6 because, or DJI Channel 8, because the public channel is where everybody's going to sort of come power up and interfere with them. So if you're flying with mixed DJI and analog pilots, you are going to basically lose one channel. I'd also like to point out that Wi-Fi uses some of the same frequencies that are used here by FPV transmitters, and there can be interference between Wi-Fi devices and analog or even digital video transmitters. It's not likely that a phone in your pocket is going to have enough output power to interfere. That doesn't really happen. But a very powerful Wi-Fi access point could be interfering with you, especially if it's placed very close to you. What I do is always use Raceband 8 or DJI 7 because these two channels are outside the range of what is used by Wi-Fi, at least in the United States, and I think even in Europe. Only in Japan is there even the potential that a Wi-Fi device would use these frequencies. Now, this is only going to work if you're flying by yourself and you can pick whatever channel you want. If you're flying with friends, then you can't all use the same Raceband 8 or DJI 7. But if you're flying by yourself, that's what I always do. A trade-off is that some video transmitters output more power on lower frequencies, and so you may get less range on Raceband 8, but there's less interference. So it's a trade-off. Your decision. Here are the best practices for avoiding interference as relates to the choice of what frequency you use. You should use channels as far apart as possible. If there's 2 pilots, use Raceband 1 and Raceband 8. If there's 3 pilots, Raceband 1, maybe Raceband 4 and 5, and Raceband 8. There should be a minimum of 2 channels of spacing for normal operations, so Raceband 1, 3, 5, 7. And if you're going to try to use one channel separation, like Raceband 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like if you're at a race and you just really need to have 6, 7, 8 pilots in the air at a time to get through your heats, it requires special steps to avoid interference, such as limiting the output power and maybe using left-hand, right-hand circular polarized alternating antennas. Generally, especially when flying casually, 4 pilots in the air at a time is fine, and 2 channel separation is the best recommendation. If you're flying with DJI or Walksnail pilots, then analog and HD0 pilots should avoid channel R6 entirely. DJI and Walksnail pilots should also use 25 megabit per second, not 50 megabit per second, because as we see if we go back to the channel chart, the DJI 50 megabit per second channels are much wider, and you will have a lot more interference. If you really did need to incorporate a DJI pilot at 50 megabits per second, you could say that channels 1 through 5 are used by analog pilots, and you could maybe do 1, 3, and 5, perhaps, with a little potential for the guy on 5 to get blasted by a DJI device coming up on channel 8, but only for a second, and then they would move up to DJI channel 3, that's the 50 megabit per second channel 3, and be out of the way. Just go to 25 megabits per second DJI and Walksnail pilots. It's the polite thing to do. Before you plug in, it's important to figure out which channels are currently in use and assign yourself to an unused channel. So don't just plug in. First of all, people who have been doing this for a while know this, but this may be new information to people who are new. Look around, ask around. If it's a casual environment, ask, what channel is everybody on? Is anybody on channel 7? Okay, I'm gonna go up on channel 7. But then don't just plug your quad in because it's probably not on channel 7 yet and you'll blast somebody who's flying. Wait until everybody's done flying, wait till everybody's down, and then you can say, hey, I'm gonna plug in and change channel real quick, okay? Nobody flying? Okay, plug in while others are on the ground, change your channel, and then when everybody's ready to go, everybody verifies good video. If anybody seems to be getting interference from anybody else, you stop, you sort it out before everybody takes off and flies. This means that if you are flying only with other DJI and Walksnail pilots, it's basically safe to plug in whenever, because your device will avoid the channel that they're on. But be aware that DJI doesn't detect Walksnail and Walksnail doesn't detect DJI. So you've still got the potential for interference there. They will go up on each other's channels. And do not fly on the public channel, channel 8, because there's no mitigation there. Everybody can transmit on the public channel. It's not expected that it would be used for actual flight, just for temporary landing while you then move to a different channel. Next, let's talk about proximity. Closer devices interfere more. Closer transmitters are more likely to interfere because their signal is stronger, and this effect can occur even if the interfering device is on a different channel. So you may think that if I'm on Raceband 1 and you're on Raceband 8, that there's no potential for interference there, and you'd probably be right. But if I'm on Raceband 1 and you're on Raceband 3, if you hold your quadcopter close enough to my goggles, there's some chance that you would interfere with me even though we're on different channels. So don't think that simply being on different channels means you don't have to think about interference anymore. This is all cumulative. It all adds up together to reduce the potential for interference. You should be aware that some goggles also transmit. DJI and Walksnail goggles both transmit, so the goggles can also cause interference, not just the video transmitter. Now, DJI goggles don't transmit until the VTX powers up, so it is always safe to plug DJI goggles in, to leave them plugged in, to walk around with them on your head. You don't have to think about the DJI goggles until the video transmitter powers up. Then the goggles are transmitting and will cause interference. And that's something that analog and HD0 pilots don't have to think about. Their goggles never cause interference, only their video transmitters. Walksnail goggles actually transmit on their last assigned channel as soon as they're plugged in and after you power down and all the time. So if you've got Walksnail goggles and yesterday you were flying at 1200 milliwatts on channel 5, and you unplug, and then this morning you're at the flight line and you plug those goggles in and put them on your head, they're blasting channel 5 right now. So Walksnail, you really have to keep your goggles powered down when you're not flying, or treat them as an active transmitter and make sure, well, you should just power them down. It's really annoying and weird, and I don't know why Walksnail did it this way. And hopefully they'll fix it in a future firmware update, just like all the other things that they're going to fix in a future firmware update. For this test, we're going to have that quadcopter on channel 7, this quadcopter on channel 8, and they are both going to be at 25 milliwatts output power. And I'm going to walk from one quadcopter over to the other, and let's see what happens. You can see that as I get closer to the other one, it starts messing with me. It never quite fully comes in or fully knocks me out, but we can absolutely see the effect of the interference. What about a more realistic scenario where my quadcopter is flying far away and somebody powers up on the flight line right next to me? So here I go. I'm flying out in the field. Yay, I'm flying. I'm having such a good time. Okay. Yeah, you can see I'm still kind of getting hit a little bit. But with just 10 or 15 feet of proximity, I'm still not getting that much interference, even though we're on very close channels. Like if I go over here, I guarantee it'll pick it up. Yeah, there we go. See, now I'm getting blasted. Now we're going to introduce DJI to the party, and I cannot wait to do this because there's a few haters out there who say that DJI cannot be integrated into a flight line, that it's inherently disruptive, and that is factually untrue. But I will acknowledge that there are some DJI pilots who simply never learned how to integrate themselves into an analog flight line, and I hope that this video helps straighten that out for you. So we're going to set the analog quadcopter to 25 milliwatts on raceband 1, and we're using the lowest output power it supports in order to make the interference from the DJI as bad as possible so that you can really see what's happening. Remember though, that 25 milliwatts, 30, 40, 50 feet away might be the same as a much higher output power, just at a greater distance. So the fundamental results still apply. And now with the DJI goggles literally sitting in my lap, we're gonna plug them in. And what they're gonna do is they're gonna power up on raceband 6. That is the DJI public channel. And as long as I'm not on raceband 6, I probably shouldn't see any interference. Let's find out. Nope, really, I'm getting a little bit of, I think my video transmitter may be overheating a little bit, but the DJI goggles really aren't doing anything. So with the quadcopter powered down, it doesn't seem like the DJI goggles do anything at all. And that's consistent with what we've seen on the bench. They just don't transmit until they get a signal from the quad. Let's power up the quad and see what difference it makes. Now I'm standing directly in between the DJI goggles on my right and the DJI quadcopter on my left. It is on the highest frequency it supports, and I'm on the lowest, and so we're as far apart as possible. And yet, you see those lines in my feed? That is what DJI looks like when it interferes. And the closer I go to one of them, the more powerful and the more the interference is going to get. And I'm going to get that interference both from the goggles and from the quad. Yup. And this is with the DJI only on 25 milliwatts. If it was at 1200 milliwatts, it'd be freaking over. Let's see how far I have to walk back to my quadcopter before I pick up my signal again. Oh, I got image. But still that DJI interference is bad. 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 Okay, it's almost gone. It's almost gone. It's almost gone. It's, okay. I basically have to get all the way back here. I basically have to get all the way back to my quad for it to relieve itself. Ah, it's back. It's back. Jesus, it's bad. So that example was with me on the exact same channel, and of course it was awful. What if I'm just one channel away? I still have image. Oh, yeah. Okay. And if I just walk a little bit further this way, I mean, it's totally usable. I'm not being knocked out of the air. It's fine. Best practices for proximity-based interference mitigation. This is something that no one ever does and everyone should do, and everyone's going to hear this advice and ignore it and not do it, and it's a shame. But everyone at every flight line should designate a takeoff and landing area that's at least 20 to 30 feet away from the flight line, because this will prevent people from powering their quads up near where other people are flying and causing interference. And you should walk your quadcopter over to the takeoff landing area, then you plug it in, set it down, walk back to the flight line, and then you take off and go fly. And when you land at the takeoff landing area, you walk over to it, you pick it up, you unplug it, and now you're safe. Unless you're walk snail, in which case you also have to unplug your goggles. Sheesh. An easy way to do this is to just get some cones, like some little soccer cones or something. You could put some kind of rug or mat down on the ground. It doesn't really, you could just say that tree is the takeoff landing area. It doesn't matter. It just needs to be something to prevent people from plugging in right on the flight line, setting their quad down and taking off, or landing right next to the flight line, picking it up and unplugging it. Now here is probably the biggest mistake that people make when integrating DJI and Walk Snail pilots into their flight line. DJI and Walk Snail pilots cannot stand next to the flight line because their goggles will also cause interference. So normally you've got a group of analog pilots, 1, 2, 3, 4, however many, they're all sitting together, standing together, and they're all flying. DJI pilots have to be separated, and Walk Snail pilots have to be separated by a minimum of 10 feet, preferably more, 15 or 20 feet. The bottom line is that without that physical separation, the DJI pilot can, or the Walk Snail pilot can cause interference from their goggles, and this can happen regardless of what channel they're on. So DJI pilots just have to be a little bit antisocial, I guess. There you go. And in case you think this is just about analog pilots, DJI and Walk Snail can interfere with each other and themselves. If you have two DJI pilots and they're standing too close together, and one of them's on channel 1 and one of them's on channel 2, and they're both at 1200 milliwatts, they will interfere with each other. So it's not just that DJI has to separate from analog. It's worse with analog and more obvious, but DJI and Walk Snail can interfere as well. They need to be separated. One of the single best ways to mitigate interference in a group flying environment is to reduce everybody's output power. Decreased output power significantly decreases the potential for interference. You have a lot more room for mistakes when everybody is at low output power. But if everybody's at low output power and one guy is at high power, that guy's going to make everybody else have a bad day. He's going to, or she is going to have more potential to cause interference. Don't be that guy. If the flight line says the output power is maxed at 25 or 200, don't be at 800 and make problems for everybody else. And it's super annoying because like there's one guy and they're at 800 and everybody, well, I don't know why I'm black. I don't know. I'm just flying. And then everybody else like turns up their output power to try and overcome it. And it's just this, I don't know, humans are going to be humans, I guess. What about pit mode? Many video transmitters support pit mode, where the video transmitter powers up at an extremely low output power. In theory, this makes it safe to plug in without fear of interference. But if you get it wrong, you could blast somebody out of the air, they could crash their quad, they could lose their quad, they could crash into a car, bad things could happen. If you're going to rely on pit mode to power up while others are flying, be 100% sure you've tested how it works so you don't blast somebody. Make sure that your video transmitter doesn't momentarily transmit at full power. Make sure that you know for a fact you're going to power up in low power mode and not accidentally power up in full power mode, etc., etc., etc. It's best to use the lowest power that you can. At races, 25 milliwatts is standard. Freestyle flight lines typically want more penetration and use higher output power. With good frequency and proximity practices, freestyle pilots can safely run high power, especially if 3 or few are flying at a time. So if you're on a freestyle line and you absolutely have to have that 800, 1200 milliwatts output power to get the penetration you want, that's okay. I've seen lots of cases where people do that and they're on like 1, 4, and 8 and everybody's fine. But again, you just have to be more aware of the other things like proximity, right? Like not getting too close to each other or not getting your quad too close to the other pilots. With DJI and Walksnail, 25 milliwatts is basically not really very usable. That's my opinion. When I run DJI or Walksnail in a mixed flight line, I like to be at 200 milliwatts or maybe 500 milliwatts, and it helps to mitigate interference. The good news is that your awesome digital system gives pretty good range and penetration even at 200 or 500 milliwatts, but not really at 25. If you're blasting 1200 milliwatts, the chances of causing problems for analog and HD0 pilots is high, so don't be a jerk. Turn your output power down and be a good citizen. Here's what motivated me to make this video. When I fly with people who I know how to do the things that we're talking about in this video, I almost never have any problems with getting knocked out of the air. And that proves that it can be done. We've mixed DJI, Walksnail, and analog and HD0 pilots all at the same time, and for the most part, everything is fine. We just get it done. And that means that this knowledge needs to get out there to a wider audience because there's a whole lot of people who think it can't be done. And at the end of the day, when everybody's flying and nobody's getting knocked out of the air, nobody's losing a quad in a lake or crashing their quad into somebody's car and breaking their window because somebody powered up on them, everybody has a better time. All we have to do is care enough about getting everybody at the flight line having a good time to take the time to learn this stuff. That's what gets me. Anybody who says, screw DJI, they ruined it. Why can't they don't work like analog. HD0 is better because they work like analog. Yeah, I understand that point of view, but here's the thing. Somebody out there is flying DJI, somebody out there is flying Walksnail. They just want to come fly and have a good time. And I think that everybody in the FPV community, I hope that they would care more about saying to that person, come, fly with us, we'll make it work, than saying, damn you, why do you fly DJI? Get the hell out of here off my flight line. I know you agree with me about that. And if you do, then that's your motivation to watch this video until you know how to make this stuff work. And then when you go to a flight line with a bunch of people who haven't got this information, you can say, hey guys, here's how we need to make it work. Here's how we can avoid these problems. It's never going to be 100%. There's always people who would rather just plug in and fly and damn the consequences. But hopefully we can get that number as small as possible. Thank you so much for watching. Happy flying. Happy flying. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Whatever you fly.